Welcome back to the deep dive.
Yeah.
We have a highly specific mission for you today.
Yeah, and it's an environment that most people outside the industry rarely even consider.
Right. We are pulling back the curtain on the incredibly strict, heavily regulated world of pharmaceutical manufacturing.
It's just so crucial to understand exactly how the medicines we rely on are actually kept safe.
Exactly. We're looking at the invisible infrastructure, the people and the organizational structures inside these massive plants.
Because we just take for granted that a tablet manufactured in one facility is going to perform identically to a tablet made halfway across the world.
Oh, totally. I mean, you open a bottle, you take a pill, you expect it to work.
Right. But the systems required to guarantee that consistency, they're just monumental.
So to understand how that consistency is mandated, our source today is a professional training slide deck. It's titled cGMP Fundamentals, Subpart B Organization and Personnel. And this was put together by Sam Pandit from GMP Scientific, Inc.
Which is a great source. Sam brings over 40 years of regulatory compliance and pharmaceutical quality assurance experience to the table here.
40 years. I mean,
It's a massive amount of experience. We are looking at the realities of cGMP from the perspective of someone who has actually audited the facilities, built the quality systems, and trained the teams right on the manufacturing floor.
that kind of tenure is invaluable, especially when you were dealing with the Code of Federal Regulations.
Oh, absolutely. The CFR can read like a dense legal text.
Yeah, very dry.
Very dry. But what we are analyzing today are really the foundational blueprints for human safety. The regulations in Title 21 aren't just industry suggestions.
Right, they aren't best practices.
No, they are the absolute legal minimums required to operate.
Okay, let's unpack this. The scope of today's deep dive covers specific sections of the CFR. Specifically, 21 CFR sections 211.22 through 211.34.
Right, Subpart B.
Exactly. This is entirely focused on organization and personnel. And Sam Pandit's tech introduces this with a really great visual.
The yin-yang symbol.
Yes, the yin-yang of quality control and quality assurance. It beautifully illustrates how intertwined they are.
And that concept of interconnectedness is really the core of a functional pharmaceutical facility.
Because quality assurance is proactive, right?
Right. It's the system designed to prevent deviations and errors before they even happen, whereas quality control is reactive.
That's the analytical testing of the product.
Exactly. Catching anything that slips through the QA net. You cannot sustain a compliant manufacturing operation without both sides functioning as equal counterweights.
And the legal mandate for that balance is established right out of the gate in the first section of Subpart B. So let's get into section 211.22.
The QCU.
Yes. This establishes what the deck calls the supreme authority of the QCU, the Quality Control Unit.
They are essentially the ultimate bouncers of the plant.
That is the perfect way to look at it. The ultimate bouncers or the Supreme Court. When you read through the responsibilities listed in 211.22a, the QCU operates as the absolute gatekeeper for the entire supply chain.
They hold absolute veto power. The QCU has the legal responsibility and authority to approve or reject all components. Finished drug products, packaging, closures. Everything. But it goes deeper than just the final product. They also have jurisdiction over in-process materials.
Which is wild to think about. Evaluating a drug while it is still chemically evolving or moving through a process train seems incredibly complex.
It is.
How does the QCU enforce authority over something that is only half finished?
What's fascinating here is the structural tension this creates within a facility. To evaluate in-process materials, the QCU must have deep, real-time visibility into the manufacturing process itself.
So they are literally watching the pot boil.
Basically, yeah. They are monitoring blending times, temperature controls, intermediate test results. If an in-process metric deviates from the validated parameters, the QCU has the authority to halt the line or reject the batch right then and there.
Which has to cause some serious friction.
Oh, massive friction. Think about it. You have huge manufacturing operations, hundreds of operators, and immense financial pressure to meet quarterly production quotas.
Right, the pressure from the top to just get the product out the door.
Exactly. If the authority to approve or reject were left to the production managers, whose primary KPI is usually yield and throughput,
the incentive to push a questionable batch forward would be overwhelming.
it would be too much temptation.
Which is why Section 211.22b explicitly requires the QCU to have adequate laboratory facilities. They need the analytical firepower to actually back up those decisions with hard data.
Right. They aren't making subjective calls. They are pointing to high-performance liquid chromatography results or microbial assays.
So without adequate lab facilities, the QCU is just a bureaucracy with an opinion.
Well said. The CFR demands they have the scientific infrastructure to independently verify the quality of every single material entering or leaving the plant.
And their authority extends to the administrative side as well, under Section 211.22c. They must approve or reject all procedures or specifications that impact the identity, strength, quality, and purity of the drug product.
They are essentially policing the rule book itself.
Yeah. If engineering wants to change how a piece of equipment is cleaned,
Or if operations wants to adjust a batch record to streamline a step.
none of that happens without the QCU reviewing the proposed change, assessing the risk to the product, and formally approving the new procedure,
They own the framework.
which ties directly into Section 211.222T. This is arguably the most famous mandate in cGMP.
The documentation rule.
Yes, the requirement that all procedures shall be in writing. The slide actually shows an image of a person signing official documents to really drive this home. The industry mantra is usually, if it isn't written down, it didn't happen.
That's the golden rule.
But looking at it from an organizational perspective, why is the FDA so rigidly focused on written documentation for every minor task?
It comes down to eliminating process variability. In a highly regulated environment, you cannot rely on tribal knowledge.
You can't just wing it.
No. You cannot have an operator performing a task based on how they remember doing it last month, or how a senior technician showed them to do it over coffee.
Right.
Written procedures, specifically standard operating procedures, or SOPs, remove that ambiguity.
Because when every action is executed according to a written QCU-approved document and contemporaneously signed off, you create a controlled, repeatable state.
Exactly. You guarantee that a lot manufactured on a Tuesday night shift is analytically indistinguishable from a lot manufactured on a Friday morning.
But taking the guesswork out of the operation relies entirely on the operators actually following those documents.
Which is the hardest part.
Yeah, that shifts our focus to the people actually working the lines. Section 211.25 covers personnel qualifications. The slides use an image of interlocking gears labeled training and development.
Because being qualified isn't just about holding a specific degree.
Right, it requires a distinct combination: education, training, and experience.
That tripartite requirement is carefully designed because any single element is insufficient on its own in a pharmaceutical setting.
So how does that play out in a practical hiring scenario? Why isn't a solid educational background enough?
Well, consider a newly hired process chemist with a PhD. They have the education. They deeply understand the molecular interactions of the active pharmaceutical ingredient.
They know the science.
Right. But if they lack the specific cGMP training for that facility's cleanroom behaviors or the experience in operating a commercial-scale lyophilizer.
Their theoretical knowledge won't prevent them from accidentally compromising the aseptic core.
Exactly. Conversely, you might have an operator with 20 years of manufacturing experience who knows the equipment inside and out.
But without ongoing training on updated regulatory expectations.
Or the foundational education to understand why a 1-degree temperature shift degrades the product.
Their experience might actually lead them to bypass an alarm that they deem a nuisance.
Precisely. All 3 elements have to be verified and documented for every individual.
Here's where it gets really interesting. You might assume these stringent requirements only apply to full-time personnel on the organizational chart.
A lot of companies do assume that.
But Sam Pandit's deck highlights Section 211.34, which specifically addresses consultants.
This is a huge point.
Temporary contractors advising the firm must have sufficient education, training, and experience to advise on the subject for which they are retained.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see the vulnerability the FDA is addressing here. Facilities often bring in highly specialized consultants for process optimization, validation, or compliance remediation.
And these individuals are usually industry veterans, right?
Usually, yes. So the temptation for a firm is to assume that because a consultant charges an exorbitant hourly rate and has a stellar resume, they can bypass the standard induction and training protocols.
They treat them as exempt from the daily grind of cGMP compliance.
Which is a massive compliance risk.
And because they don't know the site-specific rules.
Right. A consultant who is not trained on the specific QCU-approved procedures of that exact facility might casually recommend an equipment modification that violates a validated state.
Or they might just walk into a controlled area without following the site-specific gowning SOP.
Exactly. The regulation closes that loophole. A consultant's records, detailing their qualifications and the specific services they provide, must be maintained just like any internal employee.
Wow. So the regulations are really trying to standardize human behavior across the board.
Which is notoriously difficult.
Definitely. And that brings up the physical realities of operating in a manufacturing space, which is covered in Section 211.28.
This is where biology meets the clean room.
Right. This deals with personnel responsibilities regarding hygiene, protective apparel, and health. The deck emphasizes the requirement for appropriate gowning to prevent contamination, alongside strict sanitation practices.
The human body is the single greatest source of contamination in a pharmaceutical facility.
It's gross to think about, but true.
We shed skin cells, we harbor microorganisms, we introduce particulates. Section 211.28 is the literal barrier between our biology and the drug product.
The slide visuals show workers fully suited up in clean room, gear goggles, masks, hairnets. It also points out the mandate for limited access. Personnel are only allowed in areas where their presence is required for their job function.
Controlled access is a fundamental tenet of security and quality. You cannot have personnel from packaging walking through the aseptic compounding area just to use a different break room.
Right. Every movement within the facility must be deliberate, justified, and controlled to minimize the bioburden and particulate load on those critical environments.
But the most challenging aspect of Section 211.28 is definitely the illness protocol.
Yes, the sneezing woman rule. The slides have this very relatable image of a woman sneezing into a tissue. The regulation explicitly states that any person shown to have an apparent illness or open lesions that may adversely affect the safety or quality of drug products must be excluded from direct contact.
Excluded from a direct contact with components, in-process materials, and finished products. It is a critical safeguard.
Because one sick person can do a lot of damage.
A single operator shedding an infectious pathogen in an ISO 5 environment can adulterate an entire batch. That potentially harms patients who are already immunocompromised.
But here's the burden of reporting. The regulation also demands that employees report these health conditions to their supervision.
And that is the friction point.
In a high-stakes, lean manufacturing environment, how does a company actually enforce self-reporting?
That is where regulatory compliance collides with organizational psychology. On paper, it is a simple rule. If you are sick, you report it, and you are reassigned or sent home.
But in reality?
In reality, you are dealing with the realities of human nature. Operators want to earn their hours. They might fear using up their paid time off.
Or they don't want to leave their shift short-staffed, knowing their friends will have to absorb the workload.
Exactly. If the firm's culture subtly punishes people for calling out, or if supervisors show visible frustration when a technician sidelines themselves with a sore throat, the regulation fails.
The workers will just hide the symptoms to avoid the friction.
And that compromises the entire supply chain. For Section 211.28 to function, executive leadership and the QCU must foster an environment of immense psychological safety.
An operator must know that reporting a respiratory infection is viewed as an act of quality assurance.
Yes, protecting a multi-million-dollar batch and the end patient, rather than being seen as an inconvenience to the production schedule.
Which perfectly frames the final portion of Sam Pandit's training deck. Because when these systems, cultures, or procedures break down, the FDA steps in.
They issue citations.
Right. The deck provides a list of common FDA observations related to Subpart B. It functions almost like a diagnostic tool for organizational failure. We're looking at the Hall of Shame here.
Warning letters and 483 observations from the FDA are public records, and analyzing them reveals exactly where the theoretical framework of cGMP fractures under real-world pressure.
Some of the frequent citations listed include the QCU failing to follow written procedures, lack of training records, insufficient personnel qualifications, and those gowning or hygiene violations we just talked about.
But the citation that stands out the most is lack of QCU independence.
Yes. We talked about the QCU holding absolute supreme authority. What does it look like when the FDA determines that independence has been compromised?
It is a systemic failure. Lack of QCU independence typically means the reporting structure of the organization is flawed.
So it's an org chart problem.
Often, yes. If the head of quality reports directly to the head of manufacturing or to a plant manager whose bonus is tied to production volume,
then the QCU is no longer impartial. The conflict of interest is built right in.
Precisely. If operations can override a QCU rejection, or if quality personnel feel implicit pressure to approve a marginal batch to avoid delaying a shipment, the yin-yang balance is destroyed.
And the FDA views a lack of QCU independence as a critical threat.
Because it invalidates the integrity of every decision made in that facility. If the final gatekeeper is compromised, the safety of the drug simply cannot be assured.
You also see citations for failure to maintain training records and failure to report ill personnel. It seems like the common denominator in this hall of shame isn't the failure of advanced analytical equipment.
Or complex biochemical reactions.
Right, it's almost entirely human behavioral failure.
The machinery is predictable, the validation protocols are rigorous, the weakest link in pharmaceutical manufacturing is consistently human compliance.
It's the operator who decides to skip a gowning step to save 5 minutes.
It is the supervisor who fails to document a training session.
Or the consultant who assumes they know better than the site's SOP.
Exactly. So what does this all mean for the professionals navigating these environments daily?
Sam Pandit's deck concludes with practical applications for staying compliant. It emphasizes following the firm's procedures to the letter, applying cGMP correctly, and seeking guidance when there is any ambiguity.
The directive to understand and apply is key. Compliance cannot be mindless obedience to a document.
You have to know why you're doing it.
Operators must understand the scientific rationale, the why behind the SOP. When you understand that a specific cleaning dwell time is required to denature a potent active ingredient, you are far less likely to cut that time short.
The deck also highlights the obligation to report non-compliance observations to management and involve the QCU. It demands a proactive stance from every individual on the floor.
You are not just a passive participant in the manufacturing process. Under cGMP, every employee is an active sensor in the quality system.
If you observe a deviation, whether it's a cracked gasket on a bioreactor or a colleague violating an aseptic technique, you have a regulatory obligation to escalate it.
You have to speak up.
So as we synthesize everything we've covered today, it really reframes how we should view Subpart B. It's easy to look at the CFR as just bureaucratic red tape.
But the regulations detailing the authority of the QCU, the strict tripartite requirements for personnel qualification, and the rigorous health and hygiene protocols, they form a tightly woven safety net.
An infrastructure designed to anticipate and mitigate human fallibility.
And the relevance to you, the listener, is immediate.
It really is.
Every time you administer a liquid antibiotic to your child or take a daily maintenance medication, you are implicitly relying on the unyielding enforcement of these specific rules.
You are trusting that a QCU had the organizational independence to reject subpar materials months before that bottle reached your pharmacy.
You are trusting that the personnel operating the formulation tanks were properly educated, trained, and experienced.
And we're trusting that someone working in a clean room had the integrity to step away from the line when they felt a cold coming on.
It requires immense faith in an invisible system of compliance. And this raises an important question, something for you to mull over as you analyze your own industry or organizational structures.
Yeah, think about this.
Look closely at the FDA citations highlighted in the source material. Inadequate supervision, failure to follow written procedures, failure to report ill personnel.
It's a pattern.
If the federal regulations are this explicit and the internal training is so thoroughly documented, yet these specific human-centric citations occur year after year across the industry.
Perhaps the greatest challenge in modern pharmaceutical manufacturing isn't the complex science of the therapeutics at all.
The science is locked down. The ultimate hurdle is the psychology of the workplace.
How do you, as an organizational leader, build a corporate culture where a frontline technician is genuinely empowered and brave enough to halt a multi-million-dollar production run?
Knowing they're delaying critical shipments simply because a minor procedure wasn't followed or they have a slight sniffle?
Overcoming that friction isn't just a regulatory challenge.
No, it is a profound leadership challenge.
It takes real operational courage to prioritize quality over output when the financial pressure is on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of cGMP.
It's been a great discussion.
If you want to explore the original training material and dive deeper into regulatory compliance, the contact information for Sam Pandit and GMP Scientific from the slides is a fantastic resource.
Highly recommend checking it out.
You can email him at spandit@gmpscientific.com, check out their YouTube channel at MyGMTraining, or reach out at 267-334-5722. Until next time, stay curious and keep analyzing the systems around you.